The date is May 5, 1945. Just 5 days earlier, Adolf Hitler had committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, and the German capital now lay in ruins, occupied by the Soviet Red Army. The Third Reich, which had promised a 1,000-year reign, was in its death throes, its armies collapsing, its leadership in disarray. Across Europe, jubilant celebrations were beginning as the long, dark night of World War II appeared to be finally ending. But in the picturesque snow-capped Austrian Alps, far from the fall of Berlin, the war was not yet over. Here, amidst the stunning beauty of the Tyrol, a final, desperate, and almost unthinkable battle was about to erupt. This confrontation would not be a simple clash between Allied liberators and Nazi defenders. The lines would be blurred in a way that defied all convention. On one side stood the fanatical remnants of the Waffen-SS, the ideological shock troops of the Nazi regime, who were determined to fight to the last man, to burn everything down in a final nihilistic act of defiance. They were hunting for a specific prize, one they were hell-bent on capturing or destroying before the war's official end. And on the other side was a defense force so strange it sounds like the plot of a Hollywood fantasy. It was a ragtag, makeshift coalition consisting of a small, forward element of American tankers from the 12th Armored Division, men who had been fighting their way across Germany and were now deep in enemy territory. Alongside them stood a handful of German Wehrmacht soldiers, who just days before had been the American sworn enemies. And at the heart of this alliance were the very people they were all there to protect, a group of illustrious French prisoners, including former prime ministers, generals, and even the sister of Charles de Gaulle, all held captive in a storybook castle. This is the unbelievable, yet entirely true, story of the Battle of Castle Itter. Perched high on a hill overlooking the Austrian village of Itter in the Tyrol, Schloss Itter was the picture of an Alpine fortress. A stunning neo-Gothic structure with a storied history dating back to the Middle Ages. Its formidable stone walls and commanding presence belied its new, sinister purpose in the final years of the war. By 1943, the castle had been seized by the SS and transformed into a Sonderlager, or special prison, under the administrative control of the nearby Dachau concentration camp. But this was no ordinary prison camp. It was a VIP prison, designed not for the mass extermination of millions, but for the high-value detention of a very specific group of individuals. Prominent French figures whom the Nazis considered priceless political pawns. Isolated, heavily guarded, and shrouded in secrecy, Castle Itter became a gilded cage, a last-ditch insurance policy for a regime that was rapidly running out of options. Within its fortified walls, the cast of prisoners read like a who's who of the French Third Republic, a living, breathing fragment of a pre-war Europe now held hostage. The most senior figures were two former prime ministers. Édouard Daladier, the man who had signed the Munich Agreement in 1938, and Paul Reynaud, who had led France during the disastrous invasion of 1940. Alongside them was General Maurice Gamelin, the former commander-in-chief of the French army at the start of the war. Their presence was a stark reminder of the nation's recent traumatic defeat. The political significance of the captives was further heightened by the presence of Marie-Agnes de Gaulle, the sister of Free French leader Charles de Gaulle. Her imprisonment was a clear attempt to intimidate and leverage the man who had become the symbol of French resistance. Adding a different kind of celebrity to the mix was Jean Barotra, a former Wimbledon and French Open champion known as the Bounding Basque, whose athleticism and courage would soon prove to be more than just a sporting legacy. Rounding out this extraordinary group were other influential figures, such as Michel Clemenceau, the son of the World War I French Prime Minister, and trade union leader Léon Jouot. This collection of personalities made Castle Itter a unique and volatile powder keg of French political history, all contained within one remote Austrian castle. By the beginning of May 1945, the world outside the castle walls was unraveling at a breathtaking pace. The Third Reich, which had once stretched from the Atlantic coast to the gates of Moscow, had collapsed into a chaotic, shrinking pocket of resistance and desperation. Adolf Hitler was dead by his own hand in Berlin on April 30th. In Italy, German forces had already surrendered. The Western Allies were advancing deep into Bavaria and Austria, meeting sporadic and disorganized resistance, while the Soviet Red Army had solidified its grip on the corpse of Berlin. This period created a critical schism within the crumbling German state. The traditional Wehrmacht, the German armed forces, was largely spent. Its commanders, seeing the futility of further bloodshed, were increasingly willing to surrender to the Western Allies to avoid the vengeful Soviets and to save what was left of their homeland. However, the SS, the Schutzstaffel, operated under a different, more fanatical code. As the political and ideological enforcers of the Nazi Party, they were often more loyal to the dogma than to the nation. Many units, particularly the Waffen-SS, were prepared to fight to the death, viewing surrender as a betrayal of their oath. They became roaming bands of diehards, executing deserters and so-called defeatists with brutal efficiency. It was in this power vacuum, this no-man's land between a lost war and a not yet declared peace, that the fate of Castle Itter hung in the balance. As the American front lines drew nearer, the regular German army guards stationed at the castle recognized the inevitable. Knowing that capture by the SS for dereliction of duty was as likely as capture by the Americans, and seeing no strategic value in holding the prisoners any longer, the Wehrmacht guards simply melted away into the surrounding forests, seeking to save themselves. This left the French prisoners not liberated, but in a perilous state of limbo. They were technically free within the confines of the castle, but utterly vulnerable, trapped in a scenic fortress that had suddenly become a target in a lawless landscape, with fanatical SS forces still prowling the countryside and aware of their priceless value. The stage was set for a crisis, and the prisoners knew that if they were to survive the final hours of the war, they would have to take their fate into their own hands. The unlikely relief force that set out for Castle Itter on the evening of May 4th was a testament to the desperate nature of the situation. Led by the resolute American Captain Jack Lee and the defiant German Major Joseph Gangel, the group was pathetically small for a military relief operation. It consisted of a single M4 Sherman tank, nicknamed Besotten Jenny, carrying a mere 14 American soldiers from the 23rd Tank Battalion. Alongside them, in a moment of profound historical irony, marched 10 German Wehrmacht soldiers under Gangel's command, men who had until very recently been their sworn enemies. This tiny mixed column snaked its way up the winding mountain roads, a fragile shield moving towards a priceless target. Their arrival at the castle under the cover of darkness was met with immense relief by the prisoners, but it was a relief quickly tempered by the sobering reality of their numbers. They were not a conquering army. They were a tripwire force, hoping their presence alone would deter an attack. As night fell, an uneasy quiet settled over the castle, each man knowing that dawn would almost certainly bring the storm. With the first light of May 5th, the frantic work of fortification began. Captain Lee, a practical and aggressive tanker, immediately set about turning the picturesque castle into a defensible strongpoint. The ancient stone walls provided good cover, but the gates and entrances were vulnerable. The Sherman tank was positioned to cover the main approach road, its 76mm gun representing their most powerful asset. The defenders, now a mix of American GIs, German soldiers, and French civilians, were organized into defensive positions. Crucially, the military expertise within the prisoner group came to the fore. Former Prime Minister Édouard Daladier and General Maurice Gamelin, men who had once commanded entire armies, now eagerly took orders from Captain Lee, using their seasoned eyes to identify fields of fire and potential weak spots in the castle's defenses. They, along with the other prisoners, helped distribute the limited ammunition and prepared for a siege. Jean Barotra, the champion tennis player, was designated as a runner, his athleticism poised to be crucial for communication between the scattered defenders. For a few tense hours, they waited, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of a war that was, elsewhere, already over. The silence was shattered just after dawn. The fanatical Waffen-SS troops, having regrouped and determined to eliminate this symbol of defiance and capture the valuable prisoners, launched their assault. Over 150 seasoned, brutal SS soldiers emerged from the surrounding tree line, unleashing a torrent of machine gun fire, supported by sniper fire and Panzerfausts, German anti-tank rockets. The quiet Alpine valley erupted into the cacophony of battle. The initial SS probes tested the defenders' perimeter, met by disciplined rifle fire from the Americans and Germans fighting side by side from the castle windows and walls. Besotten Jenny roared to life, its machine gun hosing down the approaches and its main gun firing point-blank into SS positions, momentarily stalling the advance. But the defenders were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. The ferocity of the SS attack was relentless. Panzerfaust rounds slammed into the castle's stone facade, sending shards of rock flying like shrapnel across the courtyard. One well-aimed shot struck the Sherman tank, not destroying it, but disabling its main gun and rendering its primary weapon useless. It was a catastrophic blow to the defenders' morale and firepower. As the day wore on, the situation grew increasingly dire. With the tank's main gun silenced, the SS began to press their advantage, inching closer to the castle walls. The defenders' ammunition was running perilously low, and every burst of return fire felt like an expenditure of their last hope. Casualties began to mount on the defensive side, with several American and German soldiers being wounded by sniper fire and shrapnel. The SS, sensing victory, intensified their assault, attempting to breach the main gate and scale the walls. The battle devolved into a desperate close-quarters fight for survival. Inside the castle, the sound of German commands shouted by both Gangel's men and the attacking SS created a confusing and surreal atmosphere. The defenders were being squeezed into an ever-tighter perimeter, their lines on the verge of collapse. It was at this moment of peak crisis, with hope fading, that a single decisive act of sacrifice would etch the Battle of Castle Itter into history. During a lull in the fighting, former Prime Minister Paul Reynaud, perhaps believing a temporary ceasefire was in effect, exposed himself near a window to assess the situation. In an instant, a German sniper from the SS lines took aim. Major Joseph Gangel, who had been moving between positions to coordinate the defense, saw the danger unfold in a split second. His own life had been a journey from a loyal Wehrmacht officer to a man who recognized the true, honorable path for Germany lay in surrender and saving lives. In that critical moment, he made the ultimate choice. Gangel shoved Reynaud to safety, placing his own body between the former prime minister and the sniper's bullet. The shot rang out, striking Gangel mortally. He fell, becoming the only German soldier to die in defense of the castle. His death was not that of a Nazi, but that of an Austrian and a soldier who had finally, and definitively, chosen to stand against tyranny. He gave his life not for the lost cause of the Third Reich, but for the future of a Europe he would never see, saving a man who had once been his nation's enemy. His sacrifice galvanized the remaining defenders, fueling their resolve to hold on, minute by agonizing minute, against the impossible odds. As the defenders' ammunition dwindled to near nothing and the SS assaults pressed closer to the castle walls, the situation had become truly hopeless. The sound of enemy fire was now mingled with the shouts of the SS preparing for what seemed to be the final overwhelming push. Inside the courtyard, the defenders prepared for a last stand, knowing they could not hold for much longer. Yet, at this most critical juncture, the distinct, welcome sound of distant small arms fire erupted from the tree line behind the SS positions. It was not the sporadic crackle of the besiegers, but the concentrated, advancing fire of a professional military force. The reconnaissance platoon of the 142nd Infantry Regiment, 36th Division, had arrived. Their timely appearance was no mere coincidence. It was the direct result of an act of incredible bravery and athleticism. Hours earlier, seeing the desperate predicament, the French tennis champion Jean Barotra had volunteered for a near-suicidal mission. Using his knowledge of the terrain and his famed physical prowess, he had vaulted over the castle wall, evaded SS patrols, and sprinted through the forest until he encountered the advancing American column. He then guided them back to the besieged castle. Now, this fresh American force hit the surprised SS from the rear and flank. Caught between the still resisting defenders within the castle and the new determined attack from outside, the SS unit's cohesion shattered. Their assault collapsed into a disorganized rout as they fled into the woods, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The battle for Castle Itter was over. The immediate aftermath was a scene of profound relief, exhaustion, and surreal celebration. The gates of the castle swung open, not to enemy forces, but to their liberators. All of the French prisoners, the former prime ministers, the general, the relatives of de Gaulle, the champion athlete, were safe. They emerged unharmed into the morning light, their 5-year ordeal finally at an end. The mixed group of defenders, American GIs and German Wehrmacht soldiers who had fought side by side, now stood together amidst the smoldering debris of the battle they had just won. The sense of a shared, impossible experience hung in the air. For the German soldiers under Gangel's command, their war ended not in a formal surrender at that moment, but in a quiet and practical dissolution. Having fulfilled their self-appointed mission and with their commanding officer dead, they were not treated as prisoners of war by the Americans they had just fought alongside. In an unspoken acknowledgement of their extraordinary alliance, they were simply allowed to lay down their arms and melt away into the countryside, seeking their own paths home in the chaotic aftermath of the collapse. The recognition for the battle's key figures cemented its legacy. Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr. was rightly hailed as a hero for his audacious decision to lead the relief force and his stalwart defense. For his extraordinary heroism in action, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the United States Army's second-highest military decoration. His leadership under near-impossible conditions became a legendary, if somewhat obscure, tale within the annals of the U.S. Army. The story of Major Joseph Gangel, however, took on a deeper, more poignant meaning. He was posthumously recognized as an Austrian national hero, a man who had chosen to sacrifice himself in defiance of the Nazi regime he had once served. His name is now listed by the German War Graves Commission not merely as a fallen soldier, but explicitly as a victim of Nazi tyranny, a powerful official testament to the moral stand he took in his final hours. His death was not in service of a lost war, but in defense of a future built on reconciliation and humanity. The Battle of Castle Itter, therefore, stands not just as a curious historical footnote, but as a powerful and singular moment at the very end of history's most destructive war. A brief, shining instance where the lines between enemy and ally blurred, and the better angels of human nature, against all odds, prevailed.